Yeah, so like, it was 2013, because like I said, like just that bitterness that you've been building on account of me just not doing what I need to do till 2022. It was 9 years of just like struggle for us, really hard. So
I'm sure you did. Was there ever a discussion about separating and going your separate ways?
I wouldn't say that there was a discussion. I was the one that would say things like, we should just get a divorce, or I want a divorce, because kind of like the best way for me to explain it would be you guys in like the suicide.
Right.
It just ends it, right?
yeah,
And it's done, right? So for me, that was how it's just done. Like that quiet, right?
yeah,
Does
and that
that
was
make
more
sense?
just frustration and anger.
It was, absolutely.
But
again, we were in our little bunkers throwing things, so it was good to just throw that D word. I think it's a lot of that, and then what we've witnessed with a lot of other marriages is just like dying to self, even in a marriage.
yeah,
People are selfish.
What does that mean, dying to self in the marriage?
It's not all about you and what you want. Consider the other person. Look at it from their point of view. Hear what they have to say. Like, really listen to what they're saying.
what do they need?
What do they need?
Because the way it works, the beauty of it is, that's the whole thing with the selfishness in the marriage, is it's, well, they're not meeting my needs and my wants, and I have, and ultimately, what you'll find is that all you're thinking about is what you want and what you need and what you're not getting, and you haven't even given them what they need for years. And so when it comes to that, the beauty of marriage, especially a biblical marriage, is that you have two people. It's not a competition, you're a team, and you're literally trying to serve the other person to meet those needs, and it feeds on itself. And so I'm trying to support her and encourage her and give her what she needs and pour into her. And she takes a lot of time to prep her lessons for the English, because it does not come easy for her by any stretch of the imagination. Her mind doesn't work like that.
Well, I'm not a teacher by trade, right? I didn't go to school to be a teacher.
Yeah, and just the way her mind works, she's a very organized person. She can organize things like I wish I could, but it's amazing. But with that too, having she's a lefty, so she's right brain.
Oh God.
Yeah, there we go.
One of those.
Yeah, exactly.
The only one in my right mind, right?
Exactly. But because of that, so when she reads things, like, it just doesn't necessarily make sense to her, because it's got to be very laid out systematically. And if it's not, she really struggles. And so she puts a ton of time, like she had to read The Hobbit, or she had to read the Screw Tape Letters, with the class. And so she struggled through that. And so she was dumping tons of time into this. And so it's allowing her, hey, she needs this time, she needs this space, and encouraging her in that, and then telling her how proud of her I am. But in that, those are the things that she needs. But then I also have things that I need. And so when you have two people that are literally trying to provide what each other needs and serve each other and love each other, it feeds on itself and becomes that's where the bond is formed, where you're not thinking, but it's okay. Like, if she says, hey, I need this, I don't ever think, and it's the same way, oh, well, he's just being selfish, he's just saying what he needs, you're dismissive of this person that you're supposed to be your teammate. It goes back to the ODA, and it was that question I asked myself one day: if I'm willing to do all this stuff for my team, why am I not willing to do all this for my wife?
That's right.
Because she's the one that's going to be here when they're gone, and I'm retired, and I'm in my 60s, and I'm drooling all over myself, which ended up being when I was 35.
Wow.
So, that's the whole thing, is that dying to self means that you put the needs and the other person needs above your own, just like you would on a team. But at the same time, it's also being open for me. Hey, I'd like to do this with us, but she needs this, or hey, he needs a little bit more of this right now, so I need to give up this right now. And it's that give and take, and sometimes you're literally dragging the other person through because they're not in a place mentally, emotionally, that they can even handle anything. And so The marriage is very 95% the one and 5% the other. And so, but in that process, for me, and that's why I love that book so much, because it's like, that's what she needed. That's how I love her. She doesn't have the capacity to even remotely think about what I need or
right.
want, because she's just trying to make it through. Because in that process of the post-transplant, they told her, like, you have that first 2 years is the most dangerous. And a lot of people don't make it to that 2-year mark. And then once it's 2 years, it's a little less, a greater chance of survival, but it's still a pretty low chance you make it to 5. And so that 5-year mark was, that was a big day for us when we made that 5 year. And like she said, pretty much everybody we went into transplant with passed away, either in transplant or post-transplant in that first 2 years. Yeah. So, and then when I was frying, she was the one carrying everything and giving me everything I needed and taking care of me. And so it could be mental, it could be, somebody's like severely depressed and going through, and so that. But again, it goes back to that. The beauty of that relationship is that recognizing when you're both working together to serve each other, everybody's needs are taken care of. There's a recognition of service, and so dying to self really means I'm willing to love them in the way I'm called to, that Christ calls me to. And I know we talk about God a lot, in our podcast, but it's reality. Like, we can only tell you what we know and what we've experienced and what we know to be true.
That's right. You have such a great way of putting these things, man. We talked about some mental health post your transplant.
Yep.
When Paul was somewhat carrying the brunt of the load, trying to dry you, trying to keep you straight. It was a lot. You'd been through a lot of trauma. PTSD comes in several forms and fashions. We talk about it on the show, that a lot of us veterans have PTS from our time in wars and things of that nature. But the PTS that y'all get as our spouses, just dealing with those deployments and dealing with our traumas, is a lot. And then now you just beat cancer.
Yeah.
And you had 2 miscarriages. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of trauma in there. And
there was, yeah.
How do you deal with your PTSD? What's been the thing that's helped you the most?
Like I said before, with Paul's guidance and help and support, I went to counseling. I had 2 counselors. One was, I think, a better fit than another. And the second one, she helped me, I think, overcome like the first big hump. And then just several years after that, Paul really encouraged me then to pursue some more counseling. And I also did EMDR therapy, which he actually, I think, talked to you guys about on the last episode.
Because you did it after me.
I did do EMDR therapy after Paul.
What was that like for you?
For me personally?
Yes.
I thought it was a great experience. The counselor I actually worked with, I had known for a number of years outside of counseling, so that was helpful. But again, I'm an open book, and I knew that I wanted things to be better if they could be better, and so I did what I needed to do with therapy, and I was just very open and honest with her and listed, all the traumatic experiences I had gone through with the cancer treatment and the miscarriages, and we even talked a little bit about my childhood, even though there wasn't really anything there per se that was traumatic. And then we did the EMDR therapy, and I think it was during COVID because I did it via Zoom, right?
Yeah.
And we would do Paul did like the beepers in his hands, and I did the lights, and it was very helpful for me. I think having survivor's guilt is definitely one of the things that I struggle the most with. Having been the one out of 4 that survived this. Right. The other thing that was really, really hard for me, as crazy it was, again, being diagnosed with leukemia and going through all of that, not fun, don't want to do it again, but it was fine. But what was really hard for me was not being able to have children naturally anymore. Blessed with Sophia, but we had always desired more children. And, you know, as a woman and as a mother, like, it's a calling. And when you aren't able to do that, it was devastating. It was worse than being told I had leukemia. So with EMDR therapy, we worked on that a lot as well. And I would say that really is no longer an issue for me. So I would say EMDR therapy was definitely very beneficial in my situation.
It sounds like it was beneficial for both y'all. I've talked to a couple other people that have done that therapy, and they agreed with y'all that it should be something that is more common. Like post-deployment is what you were talking about, Paul. And the way that you described how it works, right? So it basically makes you deal with those things, which will prevent you from kind of glossing over the thought process going in, right?
Yeah, so basically because I know we talked about it on the last one, when you're in these traumatic experiences, it's bypassing all the processing just to make decisions, just to survive. So the problem with that is then your brain doesn't actually process what you've gone through. And then when you get multiple traumatic experiences, you start to get that complex PTSD because it's just like event after event after event that you haven't dealt with. Neurologically, your brain hasn't filed it correctly. It hasn't processed the whole thing correctly. And it's almost like it gets stuck, which then is why we get all of the different situations that'll flare things up. I mean, I remember one time we were in MD Anderson and this was before, because I had to deal with kids a little bit, and that was enough for me, but then Syria hit. So this is even before that. I remember we were walking into MD Anderson one day, and there was the kid just crying his eyes out because he didn't want to go.
Well, he didn't want to get it. Yeah, he didn't want to get his port.
He didn't want to get his port accessed.
Yeah.
And I couldn't handle it. And then, but with that, what it does is, in REM sleep, our brain does a lot of the processing. We don't sleep. You know, when I met our buddy Phil, I was sleeping 2 hours a night at that point, maybe, and it was not good sleep. So because of that, your brain's not doing any processing, you know, in that REM state. And even then, when you're dreaming, it's not good, right? And so it's not doing all of those things. And so what EMDR does is it goes back to the event, and because you're thinking about it, and then your brain just goes whenever they do the lights or the buzzers, it's allowing your brain to go back to the event and properly deal with it, properly file it, properly go through the full processing channel, and then store it correctly, and then it kind of takes where it's stuck and unsticks it. That's the best way I can describe it. And so you don't have those visceral responses that you do, and you don't have, like she had with the kids, because there were so many times that she'd see somebody pregnant or this person pregnant, and she was fully justified in it. It was heartbreaking. It would just destroy her every time she saw somebody that was pregnant. It was just like another knife in her gut. And so then after that, like she didn't really experience that anymore. It was incredible, and that's why. I mean, it's so simple. It really is simple, and it's nice because you're not sitting there talking for hours about your feelings and.
Because we both did that with the things that we went through, and that didn't help. Yeah. At the end of the day, it didn't help.
I'm talking about it, but it's not doing anything. It doesn't change how I feel. Yeah. It doesn't change what this is making me experience. And so, again, it's like if you get sad, it's like a much healthier sad. And like I said, it takes the teeth out of the snake.
No, it's definitely an interesting treatment. I guess what I wonder is if you let's say you don't go through that, is it affecting your decision making? Having all that built up trauma that you've never dealt with, is that affecting the way your brain processes?
Oh yeah,
the day to day.
Oh yeah.
For me, it was a lot of sadness, and I would take that out then on Paul and Sophia for sure. I think for Paul, it was the anger, the rage.
It's because you've reprogrammed your brain to just ramp up, right? I mean, you have totally reprogrammed your brain, and now with that, we can get really amped, but then come down quickly because we had to do that overseas.
Right.
That's fine when you're on a team. That's not fine
No.
outside of team life or deployments. And so for that, it does help in that process of a lot more normalization and just bringing things down so you don't get those crazy reactions.
When we're in combat, violence solves.
Right.
Right, and it's so that is what we're built to do, is to get violent right now, and we come home with that,
Yeah.
and we're still programmed to do it.
Yeah.
And the violence, we talked about PTSD, talked about raging, right? Talking about not being able to handle babies crying, those types of things. That's real, and it really does affect the things we say, the things we think, almost to where we can't think.
Yeah. It's that instantaneous reaction, right? It's like anything. You go into a firefight. It's, you know how it goes. Like, time does this really weird thing, and you just start doing. I mean, when I had my first seizure it was on an objective. That was what the crazy thing was. Is I thought I just got knocked out because we were doing a night raid north of the Hammered Mountains back in 2009. And I had the PIS 5 on my back. I was calling up all the lines. I was talking to the bird. Plus, I was hitting my houses with my Iraqis, and I was racing Salah. He was one of my Iraqis I was pretty close with, and we were racing to the house. And the next thing I know, I'm waking up. They pulled me out of the ditch. I fell head first down about an 8-foot wadi, and then so I hit the front of my head, and then the PIS 5 hit the back of my head, and I didn't know it obviously until I talked to. When I got diagnosed, I called my Terp Elvis, and he's like, "Yeah, man, we got you. You were like flopping like a fish, dude." I'm like, that probably would have been really good to know. So, but I'm kind of getting off subject here on that. But basically, like it even though I don't really remember it, I remember parts of the hit. But I reloaded my radio. I called up the bird. I was talking to higher. I don't remember those things. But I just did it because I'd done it so many times in training. It was
You do it.
Muscle memory.
It was muscle memory.
Right.
And so while EMDR is really good for trauma and PTSD and things like that, like, you do have to retrain yourself. You have to rediscipline yourself to, like, take that tactical pause and have enough self-awareness to say, okay, I need to step back for a second, just take a breath, maybe leave the room, because we're going to want to ramp up, and you're going to, just like anything in training, you're going to screw it up. You trained yourself this way for years. You don't undo years of training in a day. And that's where, I've been so blessed with her, because she's had that patience with me, but she's also not willing to say, hey, like, you're at a 10, I need you at a 2, you're getting really loud. Or, because I get that intensity rising up.
Right.
And so, some of those, they still don't leave you, but you got to retrain yourself and have the discipline to retrain yourself so that you're not doing that, because it does affect everybody else. And then also having the willingness to say, okay, I need to do something about this. We can't do it ourselves. We can't. I can get with my buddies and we can chit chat and talk and this and that. And yeah, it'll feel good to get some of these things out and, talk about things with the experience. But what about after that? You're still experiencing these things. You're still having all this PTSD. You're still all of this conglomeration of just chaos that we lived in for years. Like, and in the units, like, you don't go to the psych. You want to, if you want to not operate anymore, you go to the psych. And so I don't know how it is now because I've been out for years. I can only assume it's the same. So afterwards, you've got, on top of all this, built in, like, you don't ask for help. You don't, then you're non-functional. Then you can't be used, and that's completely wrong, because in order to be able to do what you need to do next, to be, you talked about your story a little bit with us and things that you were a dirtbag. I was a dirtbag for a while. I mean, I remember Afghanistan coming home, and it was Wild Blue, a 6-pack of Wild Blue, 8% every other day.
Video games.
And some Chinese food. And just sat on the couch. Like, didn't do a dadgum thing. And so there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, like, it's not saying, I need help. Like, But maybe you do. Maybe you say, hey, like I'm not good. Like I need to go seek something so I can be better, so I can be functional again for who my team is now, to operate properly in my current operational environment, because you're not helping anybody, including yourself.
No, you're right, and it kind of brings up that purpose, right? Going back to needing a purpose, and when we're going through our transition process, a lot of times it's hard to find that purpose.
Yeah.
Again, right? We talked about it earlier with retirement. Handshake and pat on the back, and it's like, okay, well,
Thanks.
thank you. I need some purpose now. And so one of the things that was brought up, one of my buddies watched your podcast episode, and he started identifying some things that we talked about the other day. He was talking about purpose within our purpose, right? Because you joined the military and you thought, okay, joining the military and being a Green Beret is my purpose, right? That's what you thought. And then fast forward, that was part of your purpose, but your purpose was really, you had a purpose within that purpose, and that was to be able to pastor to other soldiers and veterans and really start that process. So I think a lot of times we don't look deep enough into what we're doing, and we think we're on this path, and it's this is my purpose, but there's deeper within that. Does that make sense?
It does, and it kind of goes back again to what I talked about with the things that we've been through. Like there was so much going on that we were learning, so many things. Yes, we were going through cancer treatment, or she was, but it was to be with those people. I remember that one time, I can't remember his name. He was an old guy, missing one of his arms, and
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, we would see them every now and then. They were an old couple. They had a farm,
Yep.
and he ended up passing away, but just to have a friendship with them. And I remember this one time, like he was really struggling, so he couldn't get out of it. So I just grabbed him real quick and I lifted him up and put him in a chair, and it was like that right there just like made the day.
Yeah.
And it was just some little thing, like anybody would have done it, but that was the purpose that day, just to be there to help them, just to know they weren't alone, because one of the things that you see a lot, especially at MD Anderson, is everybody just kind of comes in and they sit. Because at MD Anderson, there's so many, you're a number.
Well, you're a number.
Yeah.
I wasn't Kelsey Bock. I was 1055543. I still know that number 10 years later.
Yeah.
That's who I was.
And so all these people, they're assigned a number.
Yep.
And they just come in, they sit in the chair.
It's like an assembly line.
And they just sit. And nobody's talking. Nobody. They're not talking with each other.
Yep.
They're not, and I remember this one time that a woman, she didn't have any hair at the time, and I thought she was pretty hot with that hair.
I rocked a bald head.
She did. She looked pretty
good. The joke was my parents must have known that I was going to be bald 28 years after they had me, because my head is perfectly round. It is beautiful.
Lucky you.
It's beautiful. Yes, lucky me.
And I remember that, but she had one of her caps on, and she had her mask on.
Yeah,
and
we wore masks back before they were cool.
I was reading Gates of Fire, because I love that book, and this woman was standing there, and she was just looking around. And everybody was just there, bald, in their masks, and just sitting there. And I remember she was just scanning the room, and she just started crying. And you walked up to her and just started, like, just loving on her. And I don't
remember that.
I do. I will never forget that. But you could just tell that meant so much to her, because she clearly was just diagnosed. She still had all her hair, or something major was going on right there. Right? She was at the very beginning stages. And nobody walked up to her but her. And so that purpose, her purpose in that day was
right.
that. And that's, those little things are life-changing for people.
100%.
Life-changing. And so it's like being on ODA. We're there in whatever country, but we're doing intel, we're doing PSYOPs, we're doing training, we're doing missions, it's never that one thing. Right? It's all the little things that you have to do to operate to see mission success. And it's no different in life. It's no different whatever area you find yourself in. It's what's the mission for today? What do I need to accomplish to affect? and it's going to always be different. But that's kind of the joy of it too, because then it's not boring. It's an adventure. You know what I mean?
I do. I think that's awesome. I love, and we talked about it on the last podcast. You can change somebody's day in a positive or in a negative with every interaction that you have. And so, talking about the purpose within a purpose, right? You made her day that day, right? And maybe that carried on. Maybe that kept her going.
Yeah.
We don't know the effects that we can have in a positive way, nor do we understand the effects that we can have in a negative way.
Yeah.
Right? So I love that idea of if we would just take a second to try to make somebody's day a little bit better, as opposed to putting ourselves first and I'm in a hurry and you don't matter. And that's one of the reasons I've never wanted to live in like a really big city, right? You always hear these things like in a New York Minute and stuff. And it's like, dude, I don't want that life. I want to be able to look at people and have a conversation, smile, and it be somewhat memorable, as opposed to, you're going to pass 1 million people today on the streets. That community of caring for each other again, right? Bringing us back to what I think we're supposed to be doing here, right? Loving on each other. We talked about it before, right? We're more similar than we are different, yet we focus on the differences.
Yeah.
Why is that?
And the electronics don't help. We're very isolated. For as many people as are here, we're a very isolated society. You know, and it goes back to that again. Everybody's just sitting in their chair, just I'm here, and if you're not when we're going through things, it's very difficult to get our eyes out on the needs of others, and understanding they're going through things too, which is kind of why for me it's such a big thing for us is, you know, within SF or soldiers or like you need to get healthy because there's people that you need to affect. And in that process, and one of the things that I've always found is that I heard it one time said, in the midst of your suffering, minister to others. And what I found in that process is you're doing that is it's like everything that you're going through just disappears because you're not focused on you. You're focused on this other person in a very unique way. And you're allowing yourself to be a light and love and encouragement to them. And it doesn't mean that you're not struggling on the backside of that or that you're not struggling in that time, but it really helps in that process because again, like it's that realization it's not about you. And so there's a lot of fulfillment that comes and that is also another major thing that helps in that process as you're going through that, because the worst thing we can do is just sit and just be in our heads. And so if all we're doing is sitting in our heads, we're going to go insane, especially for guys like us we're meant to do. And so in the healing process, like look for those people that you can, that need what you have.
So Kelsey, what advice would you give to a young person looking for that relationship with God? What advice would you give? What direction would you point them in?
Yeah, I think for me, it's easy to see God in everything. But for those that maybe don't have a relationship with Christ, but know that there's something out there, I would just say, start communicating with God. He will reach you in ways that you would never even imagine or think of. If you listen, he does communicate with you every single day in really crazy, unique ways. So I would say just be open, talk to him, and he will respond to you.
And it's usually in ways it's in the small things.
Yeah.
It's in ways you wouldn't, like she said, ways you wouldn't expect. We tend to want to look for these
neon signs,
and that star cluster, and it's not how it works.
Yeah,
it's those. I remember this one time, I was really struggling in Houston, and I felt so far from God, so far from Him at that time, and it was just very hard. It was about a week, and I just remember I went to get us lunch I think it was at Subway or something. And I just remember driving my car. It was 30 minutes to the Subway. And I said, God, I just feel so far from you right now. And I walked into Subway, and it was, voice is cracking. But I'm in puberty again. Apologize.
I love when you get
Cry some
excited.
tears for me.
Yeah, she can't cry anymore. So, but I'll never forget. As soon as I walked in to the Subway, the chorus came across. Wherever you go, whatever you do, I'm going to be right here waiting for you. And it was so pronounced, and it was like, okay,
Bryan Adams, I
Got
believe.
you.
yeah.
Sounds
But it
good.
was like, of all the songs, of all the choruses that could have played at that moment with
That
what
was
I
the
just
one.
prayed, it was that one. And it was, so most people would, you wouldn't even think about it, but, when you're listening, you're calling out to him, he's going to respond.
Yep.
But you just have to kind of have that, your head on a swivel, like you're pulling security, like, okay, how is he speaking to me?
Yeah.
Because he does. And it's in very unique ways.
So is that what you tell guys in the teams when you talk to the guys in the
Well,
ODs and
it
whatnot?
depends, right? Because we're hard-headed. and so here's the thing with God, right? God will show you so many things, but he's not going to force himself on you.
Yeah.
I remember this one time at selection, there was a kid I met. He was a fellow cadre, and we got to talking, and then he had a couple questions about the Bible and Jesus and this and that. So I started, all these questions he had, I started answering. And what he told me right before he left to go back to his unit, he said, I prayed to God, if you are real, show me. And then you came here, and you answered all my questions. And I really appreciate that. And I'm sorry you couldn't save me. Because what it drew him to was a recognition, because he understood the consequence if he actually believed. It meant he had to change. Mm-hmm. He had to change what he was doing. He had to give up the things that he really wanted to do. Yeah, they're fun. I mean, it always feels good to go bang out girls and stuff like that and get hammered and go do the stuff. And that's what he didn't want to give up. And so in that process, for me, it's like I can give you answers. I'm willing to sit down with you for however many hours you want. And God will answer you. But it always does come down to a choice. Are you gonna follow me? And are you willing to pay the price of what that really means? For us, the price has been costly. That's why in Luke 14, Jesus says, count the cost. Count the cost of what it really means to follow me. Are you willing to pay it? Because it could, and I think that we're a very unique situation. Obviously, I'm not saying that everybody's going to get epilepsy or cancer at 28 or
Go through deployments and miscarriages.
yeah, we're not saying that. But it may mean the cost of what you think are your dreams. And to submit to what his will is. And so, but in that, God always does answer. It says, if you seek me, you'll find me. If you draw close to me, I'll draw close to you. And so in that process, it does come down to a choice. And for us in the teams, it can be very difficult, especially because when we're solidified in a way of thinking or whatever, for us as guys in that life, it is very hard to say, I'm going to give all this up in whatever capacity this looks like to pursue this. Yeah. Because you talked about dying to self. You have to die to yourself in that. And that's what being a Christian is. It's what pursuing Christ really means. It means dying to yourself in your job, in your marriage, in so many different ways. It says, hey, I'm going to serve you and represent you to everybody I come into contact with. Now, we're going to fail, but that means you have to think, like, what all does that really mean we have to give up on a lot of different things? And that's a heavy price to pay for a lot of people, if that makes sense.
It 100% does, because I think me as a Christian, it's like the more you learn, the harder it gets.
Yeah.
It's like you talk about counting the cost. I'd never even thought about that phrase. Of course, I've read it, but I've never really thought about it until I had you on my podcast, and until you described to all of us what that can look like, and then when you described the crucifixion, the way that it really went down compared to like what we see, like even in Passion of the Christ, right? And it's like the love that God has for us. You put it in a completely new perspective for me. Just having that conversation, it's made me do a lot of thinking, a lot of what I would have to give up. And I think it's like when I stopped drinking. The hardest thing about quitting drinking was, what am I going to do? Yeah. Who am I going to hang out with? Everywhere we go, there's alcohol. You go play golf, there's booze.
Yeah.
Right? You go bowling, there's booze. What do you do now that I don't drink? That was one of the hardest things that I had deciding to quit drinking was, what do I look like not as a drinker? Because you almost have to reinvent yourself. You have to die to that part of yourself, right? And that was just a small portion. We're talking about really committing everything like you just described. But we put it in this perspective like it's this really big thing for us to be able to give that up. And then we look at what God did, right? What Jesus did. And it's like, wow, we have to die to ourselves.
Yeah.
But I think that's what scares people the most, because we get this going through training for us, right? We became this thing, and we had this goal in mind, and that's what it was. And that was the most important thing, because that's what we thought we were here for. But it's finding that purpose within that purpose.
Yeah. Well, because it's control. You remember my buddy Brad Fowers, he was retiring out of A15, and we were sitting there talking, and he was really struggling with, and he's a Christian, you know? So this isn't something that's like, oh, you follow Jesus.
You're a Christian, it's
easy and it's going to make all sense and this and that. But, you know, I think what the difficulty is too with that for a lot of us is that lack of control, because we're so used to, you're overseas, you're controlling the environment as much as you possibly can, because that provides security, that provides safety. And so when you actually take time to sit back and think about how much you do try to control everything in your life, to say, I'm going to relinquish this, that's terrifying for any of us. But that's again where trust comes in, and faith, and getting to know him. And I remember this one time, it was when I was retiring, and I was still having seizures, but it was not looking good because the VA rep just did not like SF guys. Made it clearly known she did not like SF guys. And so my initial stuff was not good, and I'm thinking, okay, I just bought a house here a little while ago. I can't work. I'm having seizures. My wife is worth this much money from all her treatment. We have a kid. What the heck? And I was like freaking out for like a couple weeks trying to get all this stuff lined up. And it ended up working out anyway. And the next day, after everything was good, I was reading in Numbers about Israel, and God had provided them manna. He got them out of Egypt like they wanted. Gave them manna. They were fine, and they were pissing and moaning because they didn't have meat. And so God says, "Okay, you want meat? I will give you meat. It's going to come out your nose. You're going to hate it." And I just broke down, because I was like, He showed Himself faith through all my deployments. Like, should have died multiple times and didn't. Showed Himself faithful with her in that whole process. Showed Himself faithful through my time in SWIC. And then showed Himself faithful overseas. And then answered my prayer here on
About getting
about getting out.
Yeah.
And he answered it. And you think I'm not going to take care of you now? Like, really? You know? And again, it's that learning to what does that really mean to trust him? And the Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, I think, is so beautiful because he says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understandings. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he'll direct your paths. So he says, if you do 3 things, I'll do 1. But that's a pretty big 1. And so it's that I may not know, but I know I can trust him. Mm-hmm. And he shows himself faithful over and over and over. And that's where the struggle can come in for a lot of us. Because again, it's that I want to control. I want to hold on. And I think that's why it can be difficult to get help. Because even though my life is insane, even though I'm not good and I am a complete dirtbag right now, at least I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable in this chaos, and I have control over this thing. Even the extent of I at least know this is what it is, and I don't have to deal with this, so therefore I'm in control, which is a false security, obviously.
Right.
And so, in that process, though, is there's a lot of comfort in that because I know I don't have to worry. I know stuff's gonna go crazy at times, but it's gonna be okay. Like he's proved himself faithful before. He'll prove himself faithful again. I don't have to worry about that. He's handling things at a level I can't even begin to imagine. Because, again, when we think about that, my first seizure was in 2009. I was having seizures that entire time. But my prayer didn't come till 2018. So he was already setting things up for 2018 back in 2009. And yeah, it was crazy how it played itself out. But it was an answer to prayer, again, years in advance. He was already setting things in place. And then he'd already set things in place for me to be able to do certain things, like when I went out with the band.
For the Extreme Tour.
For the Extreme Tour with We Are Victory. God set that relationship up to meet them in that 2012. And so when I was in Syria, I met one of our contractors. He was Palestinian, living in Jordan. He owned the contract company, and he became a Christian. And he and I were talking, and we were able to trace back events 15 years prior that led up to us meeting that day. So, I say all that to say, like, we have no clue, and nor could we even imagine or fashion ourselves the steps to bring about certain things. But that's the beauty of it, because it's a lot of freedom in that to be like, I don't have to worry. It's not loss of control. And so therefore it's chaos. It's
freeing.
It's very freeing in this because I don't have to worry.
Yeah.
I don't have to be afraid of, well, what's going to come and this and that. It's like he's already got it lined up. That's why I love the Ephesians. He says that he's prepared good works for us to walk in. It's already set up. We just have to walk it out, and he's going to be with us the entire way. I mean, that's pretty amazing. He's literally saying, get on this azimuth and go. Well, what? No, here's your azimuth, dude. Walk it. It is like you said. It's very freeing because it's like I don't have to worry about these things. I don't have to have all like. There's going to be chaos, but at the same time, it's going to be okay, and He's got it. I don't have to worry about the strategic level. I just need to operate.
I think you put that really well.
I agree.
Thanks, babe.
No problem. Something that came to mind, though, as you were talking about that is, I think it's good to know, like, you talk a lot about how, like, here on Earth, like, we have, like, the 3 dimensions.
Yeah.
But just knowing God and, like, how he works.
Yeah. Because there's a thing called the monster group in mathematics. These scientists got together, and they basically demonstrated, it was like 100 mathematicians. they got together and they did all these math equations. And what they demonstrated was that there's something out there that exists, and they call it the monster group. And this one mathematician,
It's easier to call it that than God.
Well, and it was interesting. This mathematician, he's dead now, but he says, every now and then I pick it back up, and if I had one thing that I could know before I died, is why is it there? Why is the thing there? And what they demonstrated is that they don't know what it is, but there's something that exists in 196,000 dimensions.
Yeah.
Like, they mathematically proved there's something out there that exists in 196,000 dimensions. We comprehend three. Length, height, and width.
Right.
Yeah.
And then times the fourth, right?
Yeah. And so, like, what would a being like that be capable of doing? Especially if they're outside of time. They're not bound by time.
See, and I like the way that Messler described that, like right at the beginning of Learn the Bible in 24 Hours, right?
Yeah.
He gets into the difference between God's time and our time, right?
Yeah.
The creation of on the first day, and talking through it like it's a 24-hour period, like you're checking your watch, and you talked about from the first time you had your first seizure in 2009 till 2018, a 9-year span, that those were just steps along the way that he'd planned out, long before any of this, right?
Yeah.
The way he describes it, though, in the opening of that book, it brought a lot of light to my understanding of, because he gets into dimensions and how we see things and how we understand things here, living in the third dimension. But as you expand that, first of all, it's mind blowing.
Yeah.
To even try to understand a lot of that, but I think he does a really good job with that.
But I think that with, when it comes to this, for people with trauma and PTSD in our community and all these things, and she and I will tell you over and over and over, not because it's we're right, you're wrong, and this is what we believe, and it's like, no, it's that, like, you will not experience the healing you need. You are not going to have the purpose you need apart from him, and you will seek thing after thing after thing. And sometimes it's going into contracting, right? Those guys that the continual deployment of another contract, that ends at some point. Tony Pryor got the Silver Star for that in Afghanistan for killing those 4 guys. Went in a room by himself. Bucket is an awesome guy. He's blind now. The dude, he can work on chainsaws, but he really can't do anything, right? Because he's blind. And so here's a guy that was very high level in special forces, contracted, did a ton of stuff, and then it ends. Well, then what? That's why we got the guys that we talked about before, burn the candle at both ends, trying to make themselves, hey, I'm still valid.
Right.
And then it's over. Well, then what? Because at some point it's all going to end. And then what do you have? Who are you? What's your purpose? And apart from Christ, you are not going to have it. You're going to be constantly seeking something to fulfill and give yourself purpose. And it's beyond purpose. It's life. It's life. It's true life. It's true love that you will never experience. And you're always going to try to seek something outside of yourself to fulfill that in some way, in some capacity. And it will always leave you feeling short and empty, which is why you go to the next thing and the next thing.
And repeat the cycle.
And the cycle repeats. There's just really no other way of putting it. It's you're going to keep searching for that answer, and you can look every other place, and you're never going to find it.
I think the best way to summarize all of it for her and I is that you don't just need therapy. You need to be made alive.